Okay, welcome everyone to the ASIS APAC webinar. My name is Dex Xuan. I am the ARVP for Region 13B. The last time we have a ASIS APAC webinar was last year, almost like August, Danny. So
yep.
we're glad to have organized this webinar once again. And this time round, we are doing it in collaboration with the Professional Standards Board. Now, before we start that, let's observe some basic protocols to ensure the meeting goes smoothly. So firstly, I request every one of you to mute your mic unless you're speaking. Okay. And of course, if you have any questions, you can actually type into the chat. Later on, we will also have a Q&A session facilitated by Peter. And okay, so for the purpose of CPE credits for members who want to claim the CPE credits, you can actually write into ASISRegion13@gmail.com, and we will verify your attendance through the Zoom attendance list. We'll reply to you, and then you can attach the email in your submission for the one CPE credit. And you are required to be present throughout the 50-minute session here. So of course, if you join us only at 7:20, all those will not be eligible. Okay. All right. So as the session is recorded, we will make available the video at a later point in time. We'll let you know where to access to it. So to start off the session this evening, let me now invite our SRVP Region 13, Danny Chan, to give the opening address. Danny, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Dex. So good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, our fellow ASIS members. It's real pleasure and honor to be here. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank our ARVP Dex, and our PSB member Peter Tan for organizing this very important event, right? So hopefully this evening, right? First of all, I hope that everyone's keeping themselves safe, right? So your safety, the safety of your family is of paramount importance, right? So this webinar that we're having right after this, right, aims to give an overview of the ASIS Professional Standards Board, or PSB, right? So we are so honored to have the board with us, today, who will be able to give us a brief on the recently published standards and guidelines. But more importantly, right, to elaborate on the ways that each and every one of us members can contribute to this effort. So once again, I'd like to thank Peter and Dex for organizing this, and I pray for the safety of all members. So with that, I hand back over to you, Dex. Thank you, Dex.
Okay, so for this evening, we have invited the board members from the Professional Standards Board. We have got 3 speakers: the PSB Chair Werner, the Vice Chair Lisa, and Chuck, the PSB Outreach Committee Chair. And at the end of this presentation session at about 8:45, there will be a Q&A session that will be moderated by Peter Tan, who is also a board member. He's the director of the ISO Liaison Committee. So we will target to end the session by 9 p.m. So with that, let me now hand over to the PSB Chair, Mr. Werner. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dex, and hi, good evening, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning. I am Werner Korman, CPP PSP. I am the chair of the Professional Standards Board. I've been an ASIS member since 2001. And so I'm really humbled, but also very excited to be here with you tonight. And before I leave the floor to the 2 best PSB members that I could have brought with me for this outreach and presentation to you all, I just want to make a couple of quick introductory remarks. So a couple of years ago, literally a couple of years ago, we were still the Commission for Standards and Guidelines. And my predecessor, Bernie Greenewald, took the initiative together with the other members of the Standards and Guideline Commission to rethink where this organization could go to. And it was about that time when they opened up the membership again to a lot of other people. There were a lot of applications, and in result, I think the S&G Commission back then nearly doubled its members. Not only in numbers, but also in international scope. And this brings me to the word that is critically important for the professional standards boards today. That's international. We are an international organization. We are part of an international association. But so far, the SNG, being an expert group, has always worked not only pretty independent, but also pretty focused on the work itself, where today, thanks to the ASIS International Board strategy, we cannot no longer maintain in our little corner of experts. And we really use this opportunity to reach out to the members, because at the end of the day, you, our members, is what it's all about for us. And I'm happy to chair one of the four bodies at the governance level under the board that are really focusing on the further development of the benefits for our members with ASIS International. And the PSB is really one of the cornerstones. And all of those of you who are working in the security profession certainly can relate to the importance of having professional, effective, and efficient standards that you can rely on and that you can use to build and solidify your security programs in your organizations, wherever you are in Asia Pacific or whatever the nature of your organization. So that's me done talking. Again, thanks for the opportunity. And I'm really, really excited to introduce now my vice chair and the chair of the Outreach Subcommittee, Lisa and Chuck.
Good morning, everybody, or actually good evening to you guys. I'm thinking because I've got coffee, you guys don't. So thank you, Warner. And before we get started, the one other person on the call today that I do want to bring to everybody's attention, her name is Ivalisa Pika. She is our staff director for the Standards and Guidelines group. And none of this would occur without her. And so I'm so happy that she's joined us today, and she is on the call. And hopefully, when you have questions that Warner, Chuck, or I can't answer, she'll have those answers just tucked away and be able to whip them out for you. So again, thank you, Warner. It's been my honor to be a part of the PSB, and prior to that, the Standards and Guidelines Commission for a few years. And I came to ASIS because of the standards development work. And so it's just such a thrill to be able to talk to you today. How do I do that? There we go. So as we get started, I know you know this, but I've got some new stats that just wanted to share with everybody. We were founded ASIS was founded in 1955. We're now up to 35,000 members worldwide and with 250 chapters. So you are part of a huge and more importantly, growing group of professionals. And that's very exciting. There's 36 subject matter communities, and they run the gamut from business continuity, IT security, investigations, hotels and hospitalities, utilities, anything you can think of, you can find a home as a security professional at ASIS. We're really focused, as Warner said, we're one of those cornerstones of the organization. So the organization's focused on education and professional development, what you're getting right now, credentialing and certification of professionals with the CPPs, the PSPs, and our other credentials. And then the standards and guidelines development. We are an accredited SDO, which means that we have standards development organization, which means that we have the ability granted through in the US, ANSI, to write standards. And it's a very rigorous process to become accredited to write standards. So we are an official standards development organization. We alluded to, and Warner alluded to this, you know, ASIS has gone through a lot of change in the last few years, and some of the welcome changes are that they have actually created, and we've created, these strategic pillars. And that has then allowed and flowed down to the organizations, specifically to PSB, and how we align to those strategic pillars. So those strategic pillars are accelerating digital transformation. We're going to be the leaders. ASIS is going to be the leaders in developing security knowledge about digital transformation. I don't think 5 years ago you could have said IoT to anybody and have them think that it was Internet of Things. Achieving recognition for the profession through standards and guidelines and certification, and very importantly also research, another part of the organization that's so important. Evaluating the security function to influence organizational success. We're writing these standards. How are you able to use them? How do you bring them into your organization? That's why we're writing them. And so that's a very important part and a flow down from what we do every day. And then serving global needs. ASIS is recognized as a trusted resource globally. And you're the picture of that to us. We couldn't have had this presentation 5 years ago. And so thank you, Peter. Thank you, Dex. Thank you, Danny, for inviting us today and reinforcing that we are here because of you. The PSB was established formally in 2008, and it was known as the Standards and Guidelines Commission. Forever, we were the Standards and Guidelines Commission. And what are we there for? To advance the practice of security management through the developments of standards and guidelines. It sounds pretty boring, right? Standards and guidelines development. We're writing words on paper for how do we function as a part of our organizations and everything else. It really isn't. You would be surprised at some of the discussions we have as we're developing some of these standards. Chuck has a lot of war stories. He probably even has a couple of scars from some of his standards and guidelines meetings that have occurred. But what's important here to me is we're advancing security management through standards and guidelines. And the other piece that's very important to me here is we use a consensus-based approach. We will sit and talk and quibble about a word and feeling and everything else until we have come to consensus. The role of the PSB is to advance the profession. Talked about that through development of industry-led, market-driven standards. Set the strategic direction, ensure alignment with ASIS's overall strategic goals and objectives, including those 4 pillars that we spoke about just a couple seconds ago. Focus on the challenges and opportunities presented by this rapidly changing security environment. We've had a lot of change in the last few years. And develop those plans and roadmaps for specific technical work to be carried out by both our subcommittees at the PSB and through the development of the standards and guidelines through technical committees. And that's technical committees, key on those words, because that's a place where everybody on the call has the ability to be able to become a part of the PSB. Our PSB directors, we bring knowledge from all over. Everything from business continuity, corporate security, investigations, fraud, enterprise security risk management. How do we look at our profession from a risk model perspective? Everybody on the team comes from different disciplines. I literally came to the PSB because I was very active with BSI and business continuity standards. And at one point in time, a few years back, BSI and ASIS actually collaborated on a standard. And so I came to ASIS because of that. What is our PSB structure? Our PSB is comprised of leadership and executive committee and 4 subcommittees. Sounds pretty simple. What that really means is, and there's a call out to the right, the past chair, and a chair stands as chair for 2 years. That past chair becomes a member of the global board of directors of ASIS. So we always have a seat at the table as part of the PSB. We have an executive committee. That executive committee is made up of the chairs of all of the 4 subcommittees, as well as Warner and myself as chair and vice chair, and our staff person, Ivelisse Opika. So we do have 4 subcommittees. I'll go in about them a little bit more on the next slide, but before we get there, the PSB itself is 25 members, and we're from all over. We have Peter, who joins us from Asia. We have multiple members from Africa. We have multiple members from Europe. We have South American representation as well as North American representation. So we seek also to be inclusive. And that has only ramped up over the last 2 years in particular. Warner joins us from Europe. He's actually located in Belgium. And so we definitely want participation globally because that's who we are. And, you know, sitting as a person in Chicago, Illinois, I don't know what your security challenges are in Asia. Our 4 subcommittees, ISO Liaison Subcommittee, and I believe, Peter, that is the subcommittee that you're formally on, and I know you also take a role on the Outreach Subcommittee, but we are actual non-voting members. ASIS is non-voting members to 2 ISO subcommittees. And so the work of that ISO Liaison Subcommittee is supporting active engagement on ISO committees. Certification Subcommittee. This is the group that works with the Certification Standards Board, the Certification Board, because they can't be in a vacuum and we can't be in a vacuum. If we're going to write a standard, they need to know about it so that they can bring it into the certification process. So we have a subcommittee that just works back and forth there. We have another subcommittee that's becoming more and more important because we've recognized the fact that the standards we write don't get used unless we provide some more underlying information, be they handbooks, checklists, guides, etc., that we're now actively developing after we're issuing a standard or a guideline. And then the Outreach Subcommittee that Chuck, we have on the phone with us right now, so I won't go into a lot of detail on that. He'll talk about that. But it is about talking to chapters, talking to other organizations about the PSB. When I look at the PSB now, back again, we're always trying to align with those 4 pillars that we talked about to begin with. So when we look at the ISO subcommittee, we say there's predominantly 2 pillars of ASIS that it aligns with. And one of them is definitely global outreach. The other is achieving recognition with ASIS, you know, participating on these global committees, technical committees for ISO only raises ASIS's recognition in the workplace of being that leading provider of security information. Certification subcommittee, they're also dealing with the achieving recognition, but beyond that, elevating the security function. Obviously, how are we interacting with the certification piece? Standards committee is really dealing with the global needs. Again, how are we doing handbooks? How are we doing checklists? How are we providing our members more than just the standard, more than the words on paper? And that also is helping with digital transformation, because we're actively looking to support all of this digitally, and we're actively looking to go beyond the words on the standard and seeing if there's any digital information that needs to be brought forward. I'm going to turn this over to Chuck now, and he can continue with this. And we left his subcommittee to be that clean transition. So Chuck, if you want to take it over and just tell me when I need to click, and I will do that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. And, just to, digress for a second, I would just like to confess that I'm a bit of a dinosaur in our industry. I joined ASIS in 1980, and like probably many of you prior to that, spent time in law enforcement and what have you. The main reason I mentioned that is I've seen a vast transition, and I can compare what I've seen develop in the law enforcement world, as many of you may have as well, in the fact that as standards, training, certifications, etc., were developed, the profession certainly was professionalized, even though I probably just made up a word. But we saw, profession and recognition, of law enforcement in many aspects as a result of those functions. So like Lisa, I too, was very enthused and very appreciative of the fact that ASIS, a global organization and the largest professional organization in our industry, embarked upon a similar path. When this whole thing started, and I've probably been working on standards and guidelines for 10 plus years at ASIS, there were differing opinions, and we worked through all of that, and we've made some great progress. And being a practitioner yet, in my organization, I've noticed that the availability of the standards and guidelines not only have been a great resource for developing internal policies and adapting internal policy, but also in achieving credibility, within our own executives, boards, and peer industries, in terms of being able to demonstrate that our organization meets or exceeds what are known as, quote, best practices, or whatever phrase you would like to call it within our industry. And also, it certainly, I think, helps gain credibility, in dealing, with not only our peers, but senior executives and professionals that we network in. So I suspect I don't have to convince many of you, how important the function is. So if I bounce back to where I'm supposed to be, talking about the outreach subcommittee, I'm very proud, to have the opportunity to chair this committee, to be honest with you, and look at it as really a two-way street in our industry. We certainly strive to put out, product standards, guidelines, and input to standards and guidelines on international level, as best we all can. But, one of the things seek most is input from all of you. I realized that for years and years, ASIS was really viewed as a Western-based, association, organization, and probably, didn't have the credibility that I think we're achieving today. But I think the important point here is that, globally, it's all of our association. And what we all need, and we have representation globally on the PSB, but what we all need is, input, on a real-time basis, from our membership. What do you see? What do you need? How are you applying, the standards and guidelines that come out there? I mean, are there issues with it? Could it be better? To the extent that, we can achieve a level where we're really producing products that are inclusive of everybody and everybody feels they're inclusive, I think it certainly helps really, build our success and further, our credibility and service to the membership. The next slide, Lisa. There's many standards and guidelines that are already published. And of course, as a member, you can certainly go to the website and obtain a copy of any and all of them. And we continually seek to revise and revamp them. So as Werner and Lisa both mentioned, we're always looking for participation from our membership. And you can do this in many ways. Certainly if there's, an opening on the PSB, you can apply for that. But even more importantly, we establish technical committees and working groups when we work through these standards. And, they largely are comprised of our membership, but depending on what the standard is, oftentimes also includes members and people with interest in peer organizations. I recall, chairing a portion of the workplace violence, standard that we had a very significant presence from human resource professionals, contributing to it, which were, again, very, very beneficial, because I think we've all seen, if we've implemented, a workplace violence program in our companies, that oftentimes, it's HR that, has some resistance or reservations or, qualifications that they want to impose on the process. So having their input and the endorsement of their primary association, at least I've seen it be very, very helpful in implementing, what I hope to achieve. Similarly, in our risk assessment, guidelines and standards, we always, get input from members in the RIMS organization, et cetera, et cetera. So, people working on these committees have viewpoints that are also interesting that you are, exposed to if you join a technical committee to work on these standards. It can be an arduous process, and Ivelisse, who's on the call, her team, monitors and goes through all the details and reconciliations of any comments that are placed in any of these teamworks. And it's a long process for them, but it also adds a lot of credibility, to establishing the standard. The physical asset protection and the business continuity management are two recent publications. Next slide, Lisa, please. And we're working on revisions coming up soon on the Chief Security Officer Standard, Pre-Employment Background Screening Guideline, and the Risk Assessment Standard. And all of these, certainly can use input and participation from everybody out there and to ensure a global presence. I had the pleasure of chairing the Chief Security Officer Standard on its first, publication, which was probably 8-9 years ago, quite a while ago, and also worked a bit on the revision of it. Many of the standards and guidelines generally are calendared for review, every 5 years. I mean, it can, if they're still effective and everything is still appropriate, they can just be extended longer. But it's important, I think, and I'm sure you will agree as well, that a lot of these standards and guidelines, are good to keep current all the time. The world is moving at a very, very fast pace, and different things occur, as we've all witnessed, even especially in the last year, that can impact, how we look at, some of the processes and procedures that are driven by standards and guidelines in ourselves and our organizations. But certainly, if these future projects coming up, any and all of you could have an opportunity to participate, at least on a technical committee, if you were so inclined. So if any of these topics pique your interest, please look into that, a bit further. So next slide, Lisa. Okay, so, my subcommittee, obviously, this webinar is doing exactly what we propose to do. And, that is to help ASIS advance security by, reaching out and getting input, helping advise our membership and people out there just what there is to offer, and hopefully encourage you to, if you haven't utilized, these tools, that are offered to you and included in your membership, that, please do it. And, please allow your organizations, peers, whoever else to know that, there certainly is a great resource available. I think the standards and guidelines, as I already mentioned, are really vitally important to our industry. And, we talked about some of the benefits, but I think we all are probably in many of our positions because we're there to reduce risks, to improve productivity, efficiency. Certainly there's a cost implication because we deal with our budgets year after year. And then, uniformity and consistency across borders. It's, as international organizations go, it's helpful if the employees, are familiar with, the core principles and processes that our organization professes, and that they operate similarly, or if not exactly the same, regardless of what jurisdiction or what branch they're working in or get transferred to, or what have you. So that uniformity and consistency across borders, I think, is an important element as well. So we do ask that you please help the PSB advance the profession, through your support. And, don't hesitate ever, to reach out, with a question, a suggestion. If something comes up and you feel I or any of the members on our board may have input that would be helpful to you or the organization, please drop us an email, a call, what have you. We're here for you. We all are. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, joining a technical committee is a great way to assist. And I think I found, and I suspect many of you may also find, that experience is very, very rewarding in many respects. Not only what you learn and understand from the input of all the others that are working on that committee, but it certainly is a rewarding experience when all the comments are coordinated and answered and dealt with, and the final product that results from all that effort is something you can be proud of. And not only see your name as part of that committee when the standard is published, but also feel personally that you made a contribution. Again, when we do have openings, anybody that has a strong interest, please consider joining. You may wish to work on a technical committee or two to really feel the process, to make sure and convince yourself that that's what you really want to do. But please do it. And in addition to calling with questions and stuff, certainly if you have an idea for a new standard, a proposal, if you see that we have something lacking, please submit a proposal for a new standard and guideline. We look at all those very, very seriously. And, I can't ever say that, received a proposal that's considered to be nonsensical or not having value or not, being something worth consideration. So all that too, is recognized as very important, by our entire team. Okay, last slide.
I think now we'll turn this over to Peter. And Peter, I don't know if we've got any questions. If you want to facilitate that, we certainly will all be here to answer them, and maybe also we can unmute Ivelisse. Like I said, you know, if three of us can't answer, I know she can. So
sure. Okay. Probably we can do it two ways. We can have the members ask it the questions that direct through voice, or if they are shy, they can actually type it in the chat box. We have almost 90 packs of members here. So anyone want to start first? If not, I can start with the first question. So how can the APAC ASIS member contribute to the PSB initiative? Is there any avenue, like how to join the technical committee?
Maybe I'll provide the first response, and then Lisa or Ivelisse or Chuck can complement, because there is definitely a process there. What I would like to say is, in front of the APAC team here, we're really glad that we have this opportunity to call upon, as I mentioned in the chat, your knowledge pool. If you look at the history of ASIS International, it started out in North America, and then gradually expanded across the world. Now we see a couple of regions that are becoming real gravity points. Europe was one, of course, but we also have Latin America. We have Africa now, and last but not least, Asia Pacific. And we have a lot of members that have global responsibilities on one hand, but also are looking into acquiring or getting knowledge from the other regions. And for me, having the Asia Pacific team here present and being able to reach out to that team, as in, guys, join us. We are no longer a merely American or American European organization. We are a true global organization. You have so much knowledge and experience, not just about Asia Pacific, but also in your own subject matter that you are an individual expert in, that it would be a shame if ASIS International would forfeit that knowledge and that experience. So we're happy to be able to reach out to you. And your question, Peter, is right on the mark, because that's the way that we are counting on you to step up and contribute. And this can be done in different ways. So I'll hand this over to Ivelisse or Lisa. Ivelisse is probably the one.
Yeah, Ivelisse, you want to take this?
Sure, I'd be happy to. It's a pleasure, by the way, being here with each of you today. So thank you so much for this opportunity. So in terms of helping the PSB and ASIS in general with the standards and guidelines development, there are so many wonderful ways that you could all help us out. One of those ways, obviously, as Chuck and Lisa and Werner have already mentioned, is joining a technical committee. It is absolutely critical to us that when we put together, if we form these technical committees, we need to make sure that our committees represent ASIS internationally. We need to make sure that we're always getting the input from members from across the globe and not just specific regions, so that as we build these documents, we can ensure that they can be used around the world. So we don't want anything developed in a silo. Another way that you could absolutely help us out is taking a look at the existing standards and guidelines. One of the things that was mentioned today during the call was the importance of these tools, specifically standards and guidelines implementation tools. And we have to say, the PSB has taken a very deliberate approach in that it's not enough anymore just to develop standards and guidelines. We are very much looking at developing other tools that will help organizations support integration of these documents. So it's really important that you look at these, that you implement them within your own organizations, but at the same time, these are opportunities that you can come to the PSB to let us know what other tools you would find beneficial and would help you in integrating these standards and guidelines into your respective organizations, especially in your regions, because we know that things do differ across borders. So we want to make sure that we take that into consideration. It's also really important to get the international representation as we engage further in the ISO world. So the International Organization for Standardization that we all know as ISO, we are very active in the TC 292 Security and Resilience Committee, and we're also active in the 262 Risk Management Committee. And oftentimes we get a lot of folks who want to engage and help us, but they don't know how. So connect with us at standards at asisonline.org. Let us know if you're interested in helping represent ASIS at these various meetings. That is also of critical importance moving forward, that we also continuously look at having different members participate on the various committees and help us push forth what is the ASIS position forward. So those are some of the ways you can help us. In terms of the PSB, I think Lisa and Chuck have already mentioned it. You can also submit proposals. Essentially, the most important thing is look at specifically at your regions and also globally. What are the things, the topics and the areas of standardization that ASIS can help support you with? We don't know what we don't know, is that saying? And so if you help us understand what are your needs, then we can obviously the Professional Standards Board can get together to look at that, evaluate it, and determine how we can support the development of standards and guidelines to fill that need in your industry. So just a couple of ways there to touch on. Anything else, Lisa, you might want to add?
But the one piece I want to add that's specific to Asia and everywhere actually in the world. So I've always talked about the fact that we're on a couple of the ISO subcommittees as ASIS. But beyond that, you as an individual person can join your accredited member of ISO for your country, which then brings more understanding of ASIS members being able to weigh in on specific subcommittees. So I personally am on the 292 subcommittee for ISO, but I'm a member of ANSI, which is the American National Standards Institution. So because of that, ASIS doesn't vote on that subcommittee, but I have a say in a vote through ANSI. So you can do that with your respective groups out in the Asia Pacific region representing ASIS also.
Okay, thank you, Ivory. Thank you, Lisa and Werner, for the replies. I see Hermie is raising his hand. Hermie, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Good evening. It's Hermie from the Philippines, and I agree with making it really international, the membership, and in the standards in the committees as well. Please correct me if I'm wrong. When you take the CPP exam, for example, if you take it internationally, you don't get to take the legal questions compared to those who will be taking the exam in the US. That's how I understood when I took mine a number of years ago. The exam that I took didn't have that legal questions. So my question is whether the CPP that international members would take would also have that legal components in the country where they all are operating. For example, in the Philippines, if I take the CPP here in the Philippines, the CPP should have that legal component as well, because I'll be applying my experience here in the Philippines. If you are in Singapore, it's the same. Now, if I'm going to go to the States and practice as a CPP in the States, then I should be required also to take that exam or a bridging course so that I would know the legal implications of what my job will be in the States. So would that be something that the PSB will be looking at?
So I can answer this question. This is Ivelisse. So and in actuality, the exams no longer have specific legal questions that relate to particular laws and regulations. So in the past, I do believe that that was the case. However, from an international perspective, it certainly wouldn't make sense for someone in such as yourself in the Philippines to need to understand laws and regulations in the United States, for example. So it is my understanding that those types of questions have been stripped from the exam, which is why you did not come in contact with those types of questions. Rather, the legal related questions really pertain more to issues pertaining to that industry. However, they do not any longer pertain to particular laws and regulations. So there is a very important distinction there, and something that was updated. My understanding is that was updated some years ago. So regardless of who you are and where you're taking the exam, you will be taking the exam based on the same types of questions that are available to everyone around the globe. There is no specific set of questions for one group in one region versus another. My understanding is that there's this huge bank of items, of questions. They refer to them as items, and any particular individual will get a total amount of these questions. They will not be the same for each individual, but collectively, they're all the same questions from the same bank. If that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Hermie and Ivelisse. So we have another question here from Hamis. He's asking that is the Fiscal Asset Protection Standard recognized by ISO? If not, does the PSB board have plans to suggest to the ISO to be endorsed or recognized?
So, Lisa, do you want to tackle this one?
Well, I'll start it, and I know you can add to it. And
sure.
Right now, the Physical Asset Protection Standard itself is not recognized by ISO. And I do not believe that it is a work item proposal for work group 6 in 292. However, we do have a number of items that we are looking at in that work group that have been directly championed by our ISO group. And Ivelisse, I'm going to get mixed up with the actual words, so you can help me there. But I do believe that we've got a standard on what is the organization and how it should look. We've been very much a part of the CEPTED standard that was developed, and in the risk technical committee, we've been very involved in the travel standard that was developed. Is that correct, Ivelisse?
It is indeed. Yes, Lisa,
Okay.
That is correct. And what I would like to mention about this particular item is that in the ISO technical committees, typically each committee has a roadmap of the types of documents that they want to create over the next 3 or 4 to 5 years. And so the Physical Asset Protection Standard that ASIS recently published is one that I think there has been some discussion about, potentially proposing to the ISO committee. However, they are working on a number of documents that Lisa just mentioned. They just published a international standard for CEPTED recommendations. They're also working on, which we are all a part of as well, through our liaison representation. We're working on security architecture. We're also working on a standard that relates to security plan. So how you create a security plan within your organization. And then the other work items that are being initiated now that they've began some review on pertaining to vehicle barriers. Now, physical asset protection is definitely a topic that fits very well within the ISO 292 committee. And again, it is something that is under discussion, and potentially in the future, we may see that as a potential proposal to ISO.
Okay, thank you for all your questions. I think the time is quite limited. Are there any last questions? If not, you can also email your questions to standards@asisonline.org. I shall hand over the time to Dex.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So at the peak of this webinar, we have 92 texts. I think this just shows the interest of these ASIS APAC members' interest in standards and guidelines. So I must first thank our speakers here from the Professional Standards Board, Werner, Lisa, and Chuck for waking up in the early morning to join us this morning. For us, it's in the evening, so I want to thank you very much. And also thank Peter Tan for helping to link up to make this session happen here. And I think we are also looking at organizing future sessions again, because since there are so much interest in this topic, so we are looking at doing it probably a few months down the road again. So if any one of you has got any interest or specific topics, please write to us. I will just post it, the email address. Okay, this is asisregion13@gmail.com. This is also the email address you should write to if you want to claim your CPE credit, your 1 CPE credit. Just write to us. We'll verify your attendance. You need to be logged in for at least 50 minutes to be entitled for the CPE.
Yep. So once again, a big thanks to Dex and Peter for putting this together, but more importantly to our speakers from PSB board. I think what we're doing this evening is pretty critical in forwarding our efforts to professionalize ourselves. So I look forward to our next session, and more importantly to our fellow members, please keep safe, keep sane, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay,
back to you, Dex.
All right.
Thank
so
you.
Then,
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Take care, everybody. Be safe.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See everyone.